We go live.
Yes, we're ready to go live. I'm so sorry about that.
No problem. We're we're live. Welcome everybody. Sorry for the delay. Just had some tech problems, but we're here with you. It's sunny in Istanbul. I don't know what temperature to put on my I don't know what temperature to put on my combi at the moment. And yes, we're good to go. Here we go. So, everybody welcome. Uh, my name's Diego Cupolo. I'm the editor. Let me start again. This was a bit of a We had some tech problems here. So, everybody, welcome. Hello, my name is Diego Cupolo. I'm the editor-in-chief of Turkey Recap. This is my sixth election in Turkey in the 8 or 9 years that I've been living here, counting the referendum. How many is it for you, Mike?
Yeah, it's been quite a lot, actually. I'd say I did a quick count before we came on. I'd say 11. This is my 10th or 11th election, Turkish elections wise, at least.
Yeah, well, this one, it looks very tight. Turkey will have local elections on Sunday. The polls indicate races all over the country are too close to call. And to talk about it, we're with Michael Sercan Daventry, a journalist who's behind jamesandturkey.com, a website on Turkish politics and elections. So let's see. On Sunday, basically, the AKP and Erdogan will try to consolidate their power from last year's wins, and the opposition parties will try to resurrect hope this Easter Sunday. I had to say it, sorry. After last year's losses, the opposition's basically collapsed. The opposition alliance fell apart. All the parties are running their own candidates, and there's general voter apathy. So, considering there's been so many elections in these past few years, do you think it's a surprise, Michael, that voters are tired of politics?
I don't think it's a surprise that voters are tired of politics, but I mean, Turks are very used to going to the ballot box, and I think that if you talk to people outside of Turkey who follow Turkey in a sort of semi-casual kind of way, I think there's a lazy assumption among some Westerners that Turkey is leaning towards some form of dictatorship or authoritarianism. But Turkish elections, generally speaking, are vigorously contested. They aren't always free and fair, but they are definitely vigorously contested. And what is cast at the ballot box does tend to reflect in the results by and large, although there are exceptions that we talk about. So Turks are enthusiastic participants in the democratic process, but I think it would be other factors, not just the frequency of elections, which is leading Turks to become quite, shall we say, tired by the process that's been going on.
Right. And I should mention that anybody can send us questions on YouTube or wherever you're listening on Twitter, and we'll try to get to all of them. So, what are you watching for in these elections? Let's just start with a broad overview.
Well, in these elections, I think well, the first thing I'll be watching for is what I think everyone will be watching for, which is the results in Istanbul. But I feel that there is so much oxygen drawn out by the events in Istanbul for very good reasons. It's a city of 16, 17 million people, 9 to 10 million voters, and so they've got it's a very important contest, the most important contest. But there are lots of others that I'll be watching as well. I won't reel off a very long list of names, but maybe we can talk more about them later on. Outside of Istanbul, though, and outside of the biggest cities, there are some contests where it will be interesting to see if the opposition CHP can retain the very strong gains that they made at the last local elections 5 years ago. And there are also, it'll be interesting to see if there are contests where Recep Tayyip Erdogan's AK Party can actually regain seats. And some of them are unlikely. So Antalya on the south coast is looking very touch and go. It's currently held by the CHP, but it could very easily go towards the AK Party. There's a lot of conversations going on about Hatay, again, another seat, another municipality in the south held by the CHP, but it was a major earthquake region, and the CHP are sticking with their controversial candidate, But there's a lot of anger there at the authorities generally, not just the national government, but the local government as well. So we're in a strange situation where both parties are drawing fire. That's absolutely a race to watch. I'll be looking at Balıkesir, which is in the northwest, but in Asian Turkey, close to places. I mean, tourists will recognize it as the place where Troy is based. Oh, actually, I think Troy is in Çanakkale, but the point is, it's that part of the country where there's potentially a three-way race going on there, and there are also some very strong CHP strongholds, places like Edirne in the far northwest and Artvin in the far northeast, where bizarrely the CHP you'd think were quite entrenched, just because of their tradition for a more westernized, more European outlook, or in the case of Artvin, a more leftist outlook. But in both, the CHP's position is looking very precarious. So it's a very mixed bag, I've got to say.
Yeah, and that's part of what makes it exciting and also terrifying for some people to be watching, because there is a lot of just strange races that are up for grabs that I don't feel was the case in recent elections, at least in the last local elections. But let's see what happens on Sunday. It seems very contentious, unpredictable. But to start with the basics, let's start with the basic building blocks, and then we'll get to all the different races and all the different parties. How do these elections work? What are the mechanics? Basically, who are people voting for? What are the positions? When can we expect results? And when do elected officials get their mandates, known as mazbata in Turkish? So how's the process work, just so everybody understands?
Well, the process is more complicated than the general election, which happened last year, because there are multiple ballot papers. When Turkish citizens went to the polls last year in May, they had, for the first round of the presidential election, they had one ballot paper, and for the parliamentary election, they had one ballot paper, and they stamped those, made their choice, and that was essentially it. At local elections, it's complicated because it depends on the kind of local government that you've got. The biggest cities in Turkey are called Büyükşehir. So that counts places like Istanbul and Ankara and Izmir, but also smaller, large cities like, Balıkesir is a Büyükşehir that I mentioned. And those are sort of super municipalities, super councils which have a strong executive mayor at the top, and they have localized mayors beneath them, and also localized assemblies. And Turks vote for all of those levels. Smaller provinces work in a slightly different way. But essentially, if you are voting on Sunday, you're going to have three ballot papers in front of you, and they've got different colors. In fact, if I'm able to share my screen, I'll give this a go and see if this works. But Diego,
I think I allowed it. Try.
Good. I'm glad you've given me permission. So let's see if this works. Here we go. Can you see that?
Technology.
Hooray. Okay, we've got somewhere. So we'll get to that one in a second. These aren't very impressive slides, I know, but it just gives a little bit more of an idea. Let's begin with voting times. Unlike the general election last year, this does tend to happen in local elections because of the time of year, sort of the end of March, beginning of April. Voting times are actually different in different parts of the country. The east of the country, where the sun rises early. So on voting day in Van, which is right on the right-hand side of the screen there, one of the easternmost provinces, the sun's going to come up there at 5:45 in the morning, and it's going to set at 6:30. Whereas in Istanbul, which is where you are, Diego, the sun's going to come up at 6:45. There's an hour's difference between the two. So what election authorities do for votes at this time of year is they draw a line pretty much down the middle of the country. The polls open an hour earlier in the east, and they close an hour earlier as well. And this is going to have an effect on the stream of results on election night, but we can talk about that more in a little bit. In terms of the actual mechanics of voting, most Turks will see something like that. That is a sample of the Istanbul ballot paper. I can try zooming in a little bit. There we go. Let's get that a bit larger. The way Turks vote isn't by pencil or by a computer or by a lever that Americans tend to have. They've got a little stamp, and the way you vote is you have to stamp in the circle. But if you stamp anywhere in that rectangle, your vote is generally considered valid. The trouble comes when the vote is when your ballot paper stamp sort of spills over into other into other party ballots areas, and that's where the disputes happen during the counting process. So running right along the top there, and this is the Istanbul ballot paper, which is going to be a meter long. You've got the parties at the top, and the bottom, all those circles at the bottom, are the independent candidates. There is an argument to be said that independent candidates are at a bit of a disadvantage because, well, the parties are much more prominent. Unlike, for example, the presidential vote, where the presidential candidates will have their photograph, independent candidates just have a name. They don't have a symbol. They need to, an independent candidate has to have very high name recognition in order to be successful in a Turkish local election. They do win, it does happen, and there are chances that it will happen in this contest as well, but not in Istanbul. Let's be frank, it's very unlikely to happen there. Once you've voted, you fold up your ballot paper, and you're always advised to fold your ballot paper outwards rather than inwards so that the ink doesn't smudge and then render your ballot paper invalid, and you pop it into an envelope. But I said before that there's more than one election that you've got. So if you were voting in Istanbul, that's the ballot paper that you would see if you were voting when you were voting for mayor. You've also got to elect your district mayor. So this is a place like Sarıyer or Kadıköy or Şişli or Küçükçekmece. There are 39 different districts in Istanbul, and there's a mayor for that as well. And in addition to that, you're electing your local district assembly as well, and that tends to be a party vote. So 3 ballot papers. You pop those all into an envelope, and which is quite an undertaking actually when it's quite such a large ballot paper. And they are, I think I've got one more picture here. They tend to be differently colored as well, so people don't confuse between the two of them. Pop those in, and that's your voting process done.
Whoa, well, hold on.
But it's
This
quite
looks like
complicated.
it's going to take time for people to fold and not smudge the ink and do all these things, right? I mean, it looks like it's going to be a long day.
It is a long day, which is why you see long queues outside polling stations. So a turnout will probably be around 75 to 80%. Anything below that will be considered a very low turnout by Turkish standards, because Turks, as I said at the beginning, do like to participate in their democracy, much more so than Western countries. The process takes a very long time. So that's why there are always queues at the ballot box, and people will try to get there early so that they can get out early. If you're in the queue when polling ends, so that's 4 p.m. in the east or 5 p.m. in the west, you are allowed to vote so long as you are in the queue by the time that happens. So everyone's vote will be cast, provided you've joined the queue in time. But it isn't a quick process. You don't just do this in 2 or 3 minutes. It will take you half an hour, I would imagine, unless you're at a particularly busy polling station to queue up, cast your vote, and then leave.
Mm-hmm. And who's getting elected? Did we touch on that?
Sorry, could you say that again?
Who are people voting for? What are the positions?
Oh, yes. So no, I did say that. So you're voting in Istanbul, like I said, you'll be voting for the mayor of Istanbul. So that's the position that Ekrem İmamoğlu and Murat Kurum are rushing for. That's the mayoralty of the entirety of Istanbul. You're also electing a mayor of your district. So as I say, Kadıköy or Büyükçekmece or Bakırköy, or one of the 39 districts in Istanbul. And then each of those 39 districts also has its own assembly. So you elect the members for that as well. And this is a process that will be replicated across all the other büyükşehir. So in Ankara, for example, you have Çankaya or Yenimahalle or Altındağ, and the same process will happen there. In smaller provinces, so we're talking about places like Iğdır or Erzincan or Karaman, places that are provinces but don't have vast populations, you will still have you'll vote for your local mayor in your local district, and you'll also vote for a provincial assembly, as it's called. So you do have multiple votes in the smaller provinces as well, but it is more than one vote that voters will be casting. So it is entirely possible for you to vote for the mayor of one party, and for the assembly you can vote for another party as well, and that does happen.
Mm-hmm. And so moving on, do candidates matter? Do people vote for their party? What can you share about this? Because many people have argued that Turkey is polarized. People stick with their sides, and that's it. It doesn't matter who you put in the slot. People just stamp the party.
Candidates do matter. They absolutely do matter. And Istanbul is going to be a clear sign of that because Ekrem İmamoğlu is a candidate who has got high name recognition. On the other hand, his AK Party candidate, Murat Kurum, is somebody who has less name recognition, but he is backed by somebody who has extremely high name recognition, the president, Recep Tayyip Erdogan. So, I mean, that is possibly the most prominent example I could name, but there are other races where people will be are very likely to make their choices based on a candidate that they like. So, for example, Urfa in the southeast is shaping up to be a very interesting race because in Urfa you've got the very religious Yeniden Refah Party, the new welfare party, which has a candidate for mayor who's tipped to win against the AK Party candidate. If that happens, it's likely that you will have a Yeniden Refah mayor with a assembly that is controlled by the AK Party. So you'll get people voting for the Yeniden Refah man for mayor, but they'll say, oh, for party, I will still vote for the party that I'm used to. That may not be how it plays out, but there are examples of that kind of thing happening in previous local elections as well. So it is Turkish voters definitely do not just automatically go by party candidate, party vote.
Got it. To stay in Urfa, we got a question from a reader who was at a restaurant basically, and people were having an iftar dinner after the call to prayer. It's Ramadan now in Turkey, and the reader's asking, how does Ramadan impact elections? Because basically he was sitting in this restaurant, people were eating their iftar dinner, and then at the end of the dinner, a Yeniden Refah party candidate came in and paid for everybody's tab. So the reader is asking, does Ramadan give conservative parties an advantage? I should add that this candidate who paid for everybody's tab also asked him to sign something afterwards. So, do conservative parties have an advantage during these times?
Well, I'd be very interested to see what it was he actually signed. But I gather from the question that he wasn't somebody who necessarily spoke a lot of Turkish. But the broader question about Ramazan in Turkish and how it affects voter choices is that, I mean, by and large, I'd actually say that it doesn't. I don't think if you had held these elections outside of the Ramazan period, that would massively affect how people vote. There will be individual cases and there will be circumstances in different parts of the country. And Urfa is a very conservative part of Turkey. And there is no doubt that they will be wanting to use the effects of Ramazan to their advantage. But there was a very interesting ruling actually by the Turkish electoral authorities just yesterday, because the local election board in another part of the country, not far from Urfa, actually, the district of Bahçe in Osmaniye, they contacted the electoral authorities to say, look, we're going to be fasting when the election's happening. We're going to be breaking the fast during the election, the votes counting process. Can we stop for half an hour just so that we can have a decent meal and then we can carry on counting the votes? The election authorities' reply came back, it was put to a board, and the unanimous decision was no, you can't stop. You have to carry on voting until all the votes are counted, because election rules in Turkey state that the moment the ballot box is sealed, the ballot box has to be opened up again and votes have to be counted there and then. So that was, it could be portrayed, but it hasn't been. It could be portrayed as an anti-religious measure, sort of impacting on people's freedom or ability to break the fast when they want. But no, in this case, the election authorities said, no, election law rules supreme. And Diego, I'm not sure, this might be a useful point because you did ask earlier and I didn't answer, how votes are actually counted. It might be worth just having a quick chat about that, going through how that process goes through, because it feels relevant.
Go for it.
I showed that graphic a minute ago about ballot boxes closing at 4 in the east and 5 in the west. Voting tends to happen at schools more often than not, and in individual classrooms there will be individual ballot boxes. That's part of the reason the election day is on a Sunday, when schools aren't actually in attendance. What happens the moment everyone in the queue has cast their vote is the ballot boxes are opened up straight away. in the classroom, and all the ballots are poured out onto the table, and in free view of everyone, you can come and witness this. There's no you don't need any pre-checks. You can just come in and watch it happening. The votes are counted there and then in front of everybody there. They'll be piled up high, and every ballot will be held up in a way that I'm holding them up right now, so people can see the mark, and they will announce one vote for party A, one vote for party B, one vote for party C, and somebody will take a tally of that on a sheet of paper and record that. And that document recording the outcome of the ballot paper is what tends to get circulated a lot on social media. So they will say this ballot box in a district in Kayseri has produced a stunning result for the CHP, and they will say this ballot box in Trabzon has produced an unexpected win for the Türkiye İşçi Partisi, the Workers' Party. Obviously, individual ballot boxes mean very little, but that is part of the transparency of the way that the Turkish electoral process works. So once the ballot boxes are counted in the polling station, once the ballots are counted in the polling station, they're piled back into the ballot box. That box is sealed, and then the box is taken to the district counting centre. And while it's taken, party observers are allowed to escort it on the way. So you get multiple members of parties piling into the same car, driving all the ballot boxes down to the electoral centre. And it is at that point that the votes are counted again and input into the central computer system. And so that is why you get a strange disparity on election nights in Turkey between a flurry of ballot box results and a very limited number of official results. It just takes time to get through that process of counting all of the results. And because ballot boxes are closing at 4 p.m. in the east, we're going to get more results from the east sooner than we will from the west, where there are more people and therefore more votes to count.
Got it. There's a lot of questions about Yeniden Refah. It's a conservative party, a small party, but it's chipping into the AKP's vote is the broad consensus. It could weaken AKP turnout in several key races, including Istanbul. So what can you share about Yeniden Refah? What are its chances, and do you believe it can have a significant impact on drawing votes away from AKP candidates?
Well, the short answer to that question is yes, it can have a significant impact on drawing votes away from AKP voters. There's no doubt about that. I'll talk a bit more about the future in a second, but in specific examples, the very fact that they nominated a candidate in Istanbul is an indication that they want to make an impact on the race, even though they are unlikely to win. The Yeniden Refah voter base is staunchly religious. They've got a very, even by Turkish standards, a very forwardly religious platform. So they believe that Turkey should cut off all relations with Israel, for example, and they've made that a central part of their platform. They believe that Turkey should, because they subscribe to this milli görüş ideology, as they call it, they believe that they are inherently suspicious of capitalism, and they think that Turkey should be building closer ties with Arab countries, with the Muslim world, and they feel that Turkey's future is best placed there. I mean, it's a perfectly it's a perfectly legitimate point of view to have, but it isn't a widely popular one in Turkey. You won't get necessarily into double figures when it comes to that. However, it is significant. 5, 6, maybe 7% of the population will comfortably vote for that. And the impact, as you say, is more on the AK Party, and the fact that they've nominated a candidate in the Istanbul race, which is likely to be very, very close between the two top candidates. Every percentage point counts. And if you have, for every person voting for the Yeniden Refah candidate, you have one fewer person who would otherwise have voted for the AK Party candidate. So there is the potential to cause an upset in Istanbul. And the other example is Urfa, which is the one that we've been talking about a little bit earlier, where there's every chance that in a place like Urfa, which is some commentators do describe it as more of a feudal system over there, which I think is a little bit unfair, but it is definitely very conservative, where family bonds are very strong, and voter loyalty tends to be dictated much more along family lines over there, it's very possible that the Yeniden Refah candidate can win. There's one more thing that I want to say about Yeniden Refah, which is that there is a broader theme going on in Turkish politics at the moment, which is preparations for what happens in Turkey after Recep Tayyip Erdogan leaves office. There isn't an indication that that is going to happen anytime soon. I mean, we've been talking about, there's been talk of another term for him from 2028, but people in Turkey realize, even if they don't talk about it openly, that the presidency is a position that, if it becomes vacant, there will be a struggle to see who can replace them. And Yeniden Refah are there as the conservative option. They want to establish themselves as the conservative vote for the post-Erdogan era, but they don't want to be associated with what's perceived to be the excesses of the AK Party era. So they can say, we are conservative, we are Muslim, we are the religious choice, but we had nothing to do with what happened in the latter days of Recep Tayyip Erdogan. So Yeniden Refah running separately is absolutely part of that strategy on their part.
Yeah, yeah, all good points, and we're reaching in different directions in time, but all worth covering because, yeah, what happens after is a huge question. And just while we are on the Yeniden Refah subject, we have one more question about Malatya and whether they can upset that race or change the outcome for the CHP, which is also CHP, as you say. CHP, CHP is the same party, the main opposition party, just to clarify for anyone.
Oh yeah, sorry. I've been using the Turkish initialisms, but yes, CHP, CHP is the same. The race in Malatya isn't one that I've been following very closely, so I can't comment specifically on it. But if it is as the questioner says, it's entirely possible that that is the kind of place where it's perceived to be an AK Party stronghold, because it is. Malatya is Eastern Anatolian. It's got very large rural parts, very strong AK Party stronghold. If there are two conservative-minded candidates, it's entirely possible that a CHP candidate can squeak through and win in a place like that. We will be seeing examples of that on election night. It may not necessarily happen at a provincial level, it may be at a more local level, but there will be cases, I'm positive, where the vote is split and unexpected candidates come through.
Thank you. So moving on to percentages and smaller parties that could impact those percentages and change outcomes. Dem Party, the pro-Kurdish Dem Party. We have several questions. One of them being, do you think that basically İmamoğlu is going to benefit from Dem fielding candidates? Do you think that Dem Party voters are going to vote for İmamoğlu? What can be expected in Istanbul with Dem Party? And are there any other races that Dem could play a key role in changing the outcome?
The thing about Dem is that Dem Party is it's a pro-Kurdish party. It's there was a time when one of Dem's predecessors, the HDP, the People's Democracy Party, they were making a pitch for a broader spectrum of the left wing, so not just Kurdish voters, but left-leaning Turks as well, and sort of and other minorities. That's an approach that seems to have disappeared in recent years for various reasons, which we probably don't have time to get into right now. Dem is very much a party that is pursuing the Kurdish vote in Turkey, which is very large. It's very difficult to count how many Kurds there are specifically, but it's anything between 15 to 20% of the national vote. So it's a significant voter base, and Turkey's largest Kurdish city is Istanbul. So there is no doubt that the Kurdish vote is an influential one. The reality is that Dem has a candidate in the Istanbul election. They fielded one, and it isn't a paper candidate. Meral Danışbeştaş is a known as a veteran of Kurdish politics in Turkey for many years. So they certainly aren't fielding a symbolic one. But the other point about Turkish politics, which you can say pretty much across the country, is I think it's fair to say that Dem Party voters are the most politically aware, most politically mobilized voter base of all of Turkey's political parties. They are perfectly aware of who they are voting for and who they're supporting. And so they're much more likely than voters of other parties to lend their vote elsewhere and to do it deliberately. And so, I mean, you've already alluded to it in the question. It's a question of how many natural Dem Party supporters will be supporting Ekrem İmamoğlu in the Istanbul mayoral election, partly because he certainly has made plenty of overtures to Kurdish people, and he's made a point of it in his campaigning, talking even about trying to learn phrases in Kurdish so that he can speak to voters. So there is a sort of affinity with him, but there's also an attempt by lots of Kurdish voters to avoid the AK Party candidate winning. So that is going to be difficult to gauge. There will be a substantial number who will vote Dem Party, but if that figure stays around 4.5% to 5%, then that is likely to be to İmamoğlu's benefit. I would say that up to 9 or 10% of people could vote Dem potentially in the election. That's certainly what we saw in the presidential election last year. Excuse me, in the parliamentary election last year. But if only half of them vote for their own party, that would suggest that they're voting for İmamoğlu. So that would definitely be a boost towards him.
Yeah, now I have to ask about polls and their credibility, and if you can weigh in on some of the forecasts that we've been seeing that say half of Dem Party voters will support İmamoğlu. Last year, I'm pretty sure most polls said the opposition would win, that Kılıçdaroğlu would become president, if I remember correctly, and that did not happen. So how much faith or credence should we give to polls?
Well, we shouldn't have given a huge amount of credence last year to national polling, and local polling is even less reliable. Part of the reason why last year the polling companies, and I'm speaking very broadly here, but part of the reason they predicted an opposition victory in the first round, none of them really predicted an outright victory for the opposition, but they certainly said that Kılıçdaroğlu would be first ahead of Erdogan, which didn't happen. Part of the reason for that is a lot of polling companies, or the more reputable ones, had a sample that was skewed heavily towards the cities rather than to rural areas. And that is actually a problem that pollsters see in other countries as well. I mean, famously in Britain, the Brexit referendum wasn't predicted because there was an inherent bias in the sample data towards city and urbanized voters rather than demographics that were likely to vote for them. And the same thing has happened here in Turkey. The MHP, the nationalist party that's a partner of Recep Tayyip Erdogan, always underpolls in opinion polls and performs stronger in elections, partly because it draws its voters from those places that are underpolled, which is a very, very long way of saying don't really trust the polls. I think the only thing we can take from them is that the polling is for Istanbul at least shows that it's going to be a close race. There is a glaring exception in the form of Metropol, who's run by a reputable pollster, a psephologist who has done this stuff for years and years, and he put out a poll in the last couple of weeks, two consistent polls that say that İmamoğlu has a 7 to 8 percentage point lead. Apart from that, it's been a very close race so far. I'm going to be one of caution and say this is going to be a close race.
Yes, yeah. You mentioned MHP, the nationalist movement party headed by Bahçeli and a partner of Erdogan, AKP, ruling alliance partner. Why don't we hear more about MHP in this race? It seems oddly silent, missing from a lot of our discourse. Can you weigh in on what's going on with silent MHP?
Well, I mean, they're not entirely silent. There's an electoral alliance going on, which happened 5 years ago as well on the government side. It also happened on the opposition side 5 years ago, but isn't happening this time. So the MHP are broadly campaigning for AK Party candidates in most parts of the country. There are a couple of exceptions. Manisa is one. I think Mersin is I'm just looking at my data here. Yes, Mersin is the other one in the southern coast where there will be no AK Party candidates, but there will be a MHP candidate who will be running. But the party leader, Devlet Bahçeli, has been around. He he very, very prominently endorsed the AK Party candidate in Ankara, in the capital. The AK Party candidate in Ankara is actually a former MHP man who walked out of the MHP in a very argumentative fashion and said some not very flattering things about Devlet Bahçeli at the time. But if you see the campaigning in the last couple of weeks, they look like the best of friends. So they've been there. But the MHP have been playing it politically shrewd from their point of view, by trying to concentrate their support rather than try and wage a national campaign. So the question will be whether they can win in places like Manisa and Mersin. They were the candidates in Mersin, in Adana, and Manisa last time, and they didn't win in Adana or Mersin. So they lost to the CHP. So the question is whether or not they have enough of a name recognition to draw not just their own voters, but voters of the AK Party, who aren't always comfortable voting alongside nationalists.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we were talking about percentages and small parties. We have to cover one more that also gets less coverage. It's Zafer Party, the Victory Party, anti-immigration party. It runs on kicking Syrians and Afghans out of Turkey, basically. Last year they had an alliance. It gained about 5% of the vote. It's kind of an untested entity in local elections. What can you say about Zafer Party's potential vote share in this coming election and how it might impact results?
The platform you've summarized, the Zafer platform, quite succinctly. Actually, I don't think I need to expand on it. One thing that will be interesting to watch on that front is how much of an impact it has, how much it chimes with voters in Turkey. The anti-immigration position is one that absolutely chimes broadly. There's for years now, there's been a lot of anger and hostility among Turkish voters of all parties against migrants from Syria, from Iraq, from Afghanistan, and the perception that the state is supporting them, giving them citizenship. It doesn't always consolidate into support for parties of the far right, like the Zafer Party. Frankly, I don't. I'm not. This will be one to watch rather than one to speculate a lot upon, because Zafer is a party that has a lot of prominence because of its leader. There aren't many other prominent figures within the party, even though there are plenty of candidates being fielded. So apart from Ümit Özdağ, who's the leader, there aren't many others who are sort of making themselves known as Zafer Party candidates. So the question really is whether this party will endure beyond, can carry more greater recognition beyond its leader, unlike, say, the Yeniden Refah Party, which is led by the son of a very prominent former late Islamic leader in Turkey. That party has lots of prominent political figures in it, and it's clearly got legs. I'm not sure the same can be said yet about the Zafer Party.
Yeah, definitely a question mark or a wild card in the Sunday's vote. So now, thank you for everybody for staying on board. We're gonna go to Istanbul, the main race, basically the one with the most potential impacts on the country. There's a lot of angles and ways we could look at the Istanbul race, but I'm going to start very basic. We haven't talked too much about Murat Kurum, the AKP candidate, kind of a no-name person before he was the Istanbul candidate. He was, a minister. He helped with construction. So why Murat Kurum? He seems like, coming out of nowhere kind of candidate.
Well, he wasn't a surprising candidate in the sense that it was always clear that President Erdogan was going to pick a candidate who was on his side, one of his team. And the fact is that the AK Party now has morphed from its very broad spectrum roots to a party that is following its leader. And so a lot of the people who remain in the party aren't voices that speak as prominently for themselves. So Murat Kurum isn't a surprising candidate or surprising choice in that sense. There is a perception that his campaigning style, that he hasn't really thrown himself into the campaign in a way that has endeared him to voters. In fact, the more voters have heard of him, view goes, voters like less and less, like him even less and less rather than more and more. It doesn't help that his opponent is very charismatic, very personable as well, and has an ability to sort of wander into a market or down a street and just chat to people. He's approachable, and that perception has worked in Ekrem İmamoğlu's favor. So Murat Kurum was played a difficult hand from his point of view. The indications would suggest that he didn't play a bad hand well, but we won't know until Sunday. The fact is, I mean, I feel like I'm dancing around the main issue here. The fact is that this is a race not between Ekrem İmamoğlu and Murat Kurum. It's a race between Ekrem İmamoğlu and Recep Tayyip Erdoğan. And the president has set the parameters of the race in that form. He says, this is the election in which we win back Istanbul. Their slogan is Yeniden İstanbul, Istanbul again. It was a big loss to the AK Party 5 years ago to lose Istanbul. So much so that they held the election twice to make sure that that's what the voters wanted. And the voters very clearly said that they did not want the AK Party candidate. And this is not the city of Istanbul, of Recep Tayyip Erdoğan's birth, but it is the place he grew up. It's where he entered politics. He feels he knows it very well. But when you're the president of a country and you come with a security apparatus and a convoy, it's harder for a president to connect with ordinary voters in the way that the mayor of Istanbul can. So it's an interesting race from that point of view, and we aren't saying anything extraordinary by saying that this is an İmamoğlu Erdoğan race, because that is what Erdoğan wanted it to be.
Right. Yeah, and the charisma factor is a huge difference between İmamoğlu and Kurum. And I'm wondering, because many people that I've talked to in recent days, I mean, it seems like voters understand that when they're voting for Kurum, they're voting for Erdoğan, and basically making some kind of AKP alignment for Istanbul. I want to relate it to having Apple EarPods instead of Samsung for your iPhone, basically like switching to the AKP system instead of having a mixed technology that maybe doesn't work together all the time, has some glitches. And that seems to be why, the basic argument for voting for Kurum is just to have that alignment, central government, local government. And when I hear people talking about İmamoğlu, he is popular. It seems like a good amount of residents still support him from different sides of the electoral aisle. But what I'm wondering is, many people seem to tell me that İmamoğlu has made following outside of the CHP, and he's not linked to that party's fate, basically. If, the party has made some questionable decisions in the past, but İmamoğlu seems to have his own appeal. He can reach to different groups, religious, Kurdish, different minorities. Do you believe this is accurate, or is this just people talking to me on the street?
Well, this election is actually going to answer that question, I think, because Recep Tayyip Erdoğan is absolutely, and has been for the last 5 or 6 elections, larger than his own party. And there is a chance now that we're approaching an era where Ekrem İmamoğlu becomes larger than his party, able to appeal personally to voters more than the emblem of his political movement. The question really is that there are I suppose one thing that I'd like to remark on what you just said is about what the future bears for people who live in Istanbul and have to cope with it. And I haven't visited Istanbul nearly as much as I would like over the last 3 or 4 years. But when I've been, and I've heard from people who live there as well, how strange it is in terms of a transport point of view. For example, transport is always a major issue in any local election in any big city. It certainly is in London, which is where I am now, in places like New York, and not least in Istanbul. But people in Istanbul have had a very bizarre makeup for the last 5 years. There are 2 separate metro companies. There are metros that are run by the mayor, and there are metros that are run by the Ministry of Transport. So they're badged differently. One has a big M over it, and the other one has a big U over it. It's difficult to interchange between the new lines. You've got 2 separate forces of government: local government run by the CHP, and national government run by the AK Party, and they were all competing over Istanbul to sort of project their projects to say we are the ones who can run the city better. And there are accusations on either side as well about who is obstructing whom. And taxis are another issue in Istanbul. Again, transport, where Ekrem İmamoğlu says he has a plan on how to increase the number of taxis on the road. But the assembly in Istanbul's municipality is the majority is held by the national government, by the AK Party and the MHP, and they've been blocking every reform that the mayor has put forward. Again, there's an ideological clash there about who should actually be running the city. Should it be the mayor or should it be central government? And in a city like Istanbul, which has a budget and a population to rival many small European countries, these kind of things matter. And so that is part for voters in Istanbul. That is one of the things that they will have to consider. Do they want do they want streamlined decision making, which is the Recep Tayyip Erdogan argument? It was certainly the argument when he introduced the executive presidential system to say one person will sign off everything so we can get things done faster. That was the key sell. Whereas they said parliamentary democracy, parliamentary government is difficult and awkward and involves compromises and we can't get things done properly. And Turkish voters were very divided on that question. Voters in Istanbul seem to be in the same place. Do we want streamlined decision making with having the same colour of government at local and national level, or do we want a little bit of rivalry between the two? Because disagreement and compromise can be a good thing. That is the decision that Istanbul voters will be making on Sunday.
Yeah, a lot at stake, and I can confirm transportation is a mess. I'm pretty sure my social life has been damaged since I moved to Istanbul, just because people don't want to go places. If I have friends on the other side of the city, I don't see them. I see them maybe once a year. I saw them more often when I lived in Ankara. That's how bad the transportation is here. So it is a problem. It's not just one mayor's fault. It is a huge city, and there are many new transport options coming out, some of them under İmamoğlu. But it's kind of funny to see both candidates trying to take credit for the progress in the city and which party built what and how many kilometers of metro have been built. I mean, there's a lot of work to do, but basically, I mean, what is the case for voting for Kurum is what I'm wondering, because what I hear is that there is a fear that an earthquake is coming. Most of the buildings are not going to stand up well if it's a significant earthquake. And Kurum can quickly rebuild and do some urban, what do they call it? Urban renewal. And İmamoğlu would be slower. They're making the same case in Hatay, basically, a place that was destroyed by the February 6th earthquakes. They're saying if we vote for an AKP candidate, maybe we'll get rebuilt faster. Apart from that, what is Kurum's appeal other than being, the same software as the AKP and rebuilding possibly faster, which is a theory?
Well, that's the choice. That is absolutely the choice. What is your software? Are you going for Apple iPods or are you going for the Samsung equivalent? Is the question that voters will have to make, and they are very aware of this. It is a question of trust, and I think it's a very interesting place that we're in from a non-Istanbul resident's point of view, like mine, because 10 years ago, this was not the debate that we were having, irrespective of the economic trials that Turkey is going through right now. The question 10 years ago was, can Recep Tayyip Erdogan ever be defeated? Now Turkish voters have much more of a choice in places like Istanbul. Neither choice is 100% attractive or 100% not attractive. There are pros and cons on both sides, and that is what they are weighing up. But it's a fascinating aspect of the race in places like Istanbul, that the democratic options do exist in a way perhaps they didn't 10 years ago, even though the race is imbalanced in many, many ways.
Yes. Yeah, and we should mention that the elections are free but not fair is the saying for Turkey. And there are many advantages for the ruling AKP candidates throughout the country, media and just infrastructure, mechanics, oversight. Especially in the Southeast, you have a lot of irregularities, which should be, on everybody's radar who whoever's watching this election. So moving forward, I mean, what is the significance of the election win? What does it mean if Imamoglu wins? What would he be the automatic presidential candidate, or would it be Yavaş, the Ankara mayor for the CHP? And if he loses, does that mean Erdogan, are we moving towards a one-party state? I mean, how do you project this moving forward, the outcomes?
By a very strange coincidence, there was a sudden fireworks display behind you over your shoulders as that happened. I think you've got a funny filter on,
Oh,
which was quite funny when it just coincided with what you were saying. Let's talk about the future, and there was sudden fireworks. It was quite apt. Let's talk about the future. I just wanted to say one thing about electoral irregularities.
oh dear.
Before we just move on, the this election is not going to be observed by overseas observers. Local elections aren't generally observed by outside observers, unlike national elections or referendums are in Turkey. And because they are individual contests, people aren't voting for the same thing in every part of the country. They are voting for the same parties, but the candidates are different and the makeup is different according to what kind of local government you've got. There is the room for irregularities is greater in these elections, and we have seen examples in the past where there have been elections that have been disputed. Not least, I mean, 10 years ago in Ankara, well, that was a famous one where the election between the then AK Party candidate Melih Gökçek and Mansur Yavaş, who was the CHP candidate, the results were very, very close. And in fact, the flow of official results stopped, and there was a police presence at the counting station, and the final results showed a narrow win for the AK Party, which Mansur Yavaş has never accepted. He never accepted that he lost that election. So there is the potential for something like that happening again. And you're quite right that the southeast, there are also cases where it happens there as well. Going to the future, if Imamoglu wins, then this won't be a surprise to anyone that he will be establishing himself as the principal rival to Recep Tayyip Erdogan, because he will have defeated Recep Tayyip Erdogan indirectly in 2 successive elections, or 3 successive elections if you count the repeat vote in 2019. So that alludes back to my point that I was making about the Yeniden Refah Party and preparing for the post-Erdogan era. This is another example of preparation for the post-Erdogan era. The Turkish opposition will have a very strong figurehead around which they might potentially coalesce, but Ekrem İmamoğlu won't necessarily be the one who unites everybody. There's a lot of antipathy. The leader of the İYİ Party, who we haven't spoken about, the nationalist İYİ Party, Meral Akşener, used to be a supporter of his. Now she isn't. And so how she might treat an İmamoğlu victory after the next election and how İmamoğlu might respond to that, these are all things that we will have to see in the days and weeks to come. But there is no doubt that he will be establishing himself as the alternative to Erdogan, the possible rival if Recep Tayyip Erdogan runs again in the election that is to come. If İmamoğlu loses the election, it will make his job more challenging. But we won't see the end of him, I think, because he will be very popular within his party still, but there will have to be a period of consolidation, not least because he won't have any elected office anywhere to hold. So it will be, if he is being shrewd, he will be planning for both eventualities. But it will be the future of Turkey will be a little less certain, but the future of Turkey never really is certain.
Well said. As a journalist, we know this well. So that's why I asked about Imamoglu's charisma and support bubble being separate from the party, because basically it's linked to what happens if he loses. Does he just disappear like İnce, the former presidential candidate that basically disappeared on election night in 2018 and has since started unsuccessful party? Can I say it's unsuccessful? It's small. Let's call it small to be nice. So Imamoglu will continue to exist,
Modest.
is what you say. Modest, polite. Let's be polite.
Well, I mean, İnce is in a different league, really, to İmamoğlu from that point of view. Not least because İnce was the candidate of the biggest opposition party in Turkey for president, and then he walked out thinking that he had a large amount of support, and it turned out that he didn't. if I think Ekrem İmamoğlu would be drawing lessons from that for sure, because there is, and the CHP is one of the most institutionalized, most recognizable political parties in the country. And to have the mechanism of that, the full force of that party behind you, which İmamoğlu currently does, is something not to walk away from. So that's why he will be around, even if he loses this election.
Yeah. Just a couple more questions. Are you okay to stay?
Yes,
Like,
for a couple more minutes, then I will have to disappear, I'm afraid.
okay. Thank you for making the time for this. We haven't talked about the economy. It's a major issue. It's probably what we'll be covering after the vote, what happens to the Turkish lira. And many commentators in the lead up to these elections have been talking about the pensions and basically cost of living has gone way up in Turkey. It's easy to spend 1,000 liras at the supermarket for one bag of groceries. So if you're a pensioner, you're getting 10,000 liras a month right now. And like I said, if you're spending 1,000 liras on just one grocery store visit, and then you have to pay rent and all these other expenses, it can get quite tight. So I've heard many people making the argument that pensioners are going to swing these elections against the ruling party because they're upset about how much life costs these days. How do you think the economy will impact the vote?
The cost of living is a major factor, and it's perhaps more so than in any election since 2002, which was the big election that brought Recep Tayyip Erdogan and the AK Party to power originally 22 years ago. Pensioners is an interesting point in Turkey generally, because it's a very much broader, actually. The kind of person who is a pensioner in Turkey is much wider than in Western countries they may be accustomed to. I know people who have retired in Turkey at the age of 47 because the system has been geared and has been melded by successive political parties of all colours and all ideological positions for broadly for electoral success over the years, so that basically voters have been sold promises of retirement and a regular salary from the state, provided they contribute for 20 years or they contribute for 25 years. So there is a ticking pensions time bomb in Turkey generally, and to the AK Party's credit, they have recognized this for years. They have known that in the long term, Turkey cannot sustain the amount of money it pays out in pensions to a body of people who are sometimes of working age and of fit and able working age as well. So pensioners aren't always elderly in Turkey. However, they do also struggle to find work, and so many people rely on pensions like that, and many families rely on single pensions. So there is a long-term problem and a short-term one as well. For the short term, the question will be how individual candidates can offer pledges that will appeal to those. And we'll go back to Istanbul. There is one of the campaign issues has been around cost of living and opening up low-cost restaurants, which is something that Ekrem İmamoğlu has been doing over several years, and they've certainly been popular according to municipality figures. And there was one of the reasons why there's been criticism of the AK Party candidate of Murat Kurum was because he appeared, at least in one voter exchange, to belittle that particular policy, to say that we could do this, we could do it easily. It begged the question from many voters, well, why not do it then? You're in government nationally. The point was that there is a perception that in some quarters that the AK Party is focused more on grand projects, metros, motorways, bridges, Kanal Istanbul, the big project that has been one of President Erdogan's favorites for years. The big projects rather than the more humble offerings, which individual voters would appreciate when the cost of living is crunched as much as it is.
Yeah. Yeah. And to wrap, basic question, when can we expect results for Istanbul? Any idea?
The results for Istanbul are going to be it depends on how close the race is. That is as simple as I can be. If it is clear cut, then it will be soon. It will be within, I would say that by 5-6 o'clock in the morning, it will be pretty clear who has won. If the results are close, then it could take days. We talked at the beginning about the mazbata, the official certificate which you are given. That tends to happen about 3 or 4 days after election day, and that is the proof of document to say that a candidate has won the election. So by the end of next week, the majority of the mazbatas should have been given out. But let's just say that the 1st of April will be a very busy day in Turkey, especially if the result is not clear cut.
So from Good Friday to Easter Sunday and then April Fool's Day, let's hope for a good outcome for whoever anyone is supporting here. It seems really unclear what's going to happen. I really appreciate your thoughts and all this very, very concise information you've just shared with us. It's very helpful. It's very hard to follow Turkish elections. So thank you very much, Michael, for joining us today. Again, Michael Sercan Daventry runs jamesandturkey.com, website on Turkish politics and elections. I highly recommend following it. And to everybody that listened in, thank you as well. For those who came late, this broadcast will remain on YouTube. You can watch it anytime on YouTube. And if you prefer to watch it on a podcast app, we will be posting this to Recap Radio, which is our new podcast. And you should totally subscribe to that and listen to our past episodes before Sunday's vote. We're also going to have an Istanbul episode out on Recap Radio tomorrow, which I highly recommend. We'll be covering the race in detail. So thanks again, Michael. Thank you to everybody that listened, and best of luck this weekend to everybody who's watching and voting.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.